This is the Coyote Lab and welcome back to the lake, where in this episode I build a rooftop deck on top of and out in front of a shipping container cabin. This is a project that took me more than 6 months from start to finish, but I suppose not too long in actual man hours, since I built a number of projects in between starting and finishing this deck. The deck started, I suppose, when I dropped off my shipping container, got it leveled, and started working on a deck out in front of it. At that time I set 4 vertical 4x4s in the ground, 5 feet in front of the container and as tall as the shipping container. Once that was finished, I went around the perimeter of the container and welded pretty heavy duty angle steel with holes in it that I could go around and attach 2x6 boards to. I set these back from the perimeter of the container because I wanted space to build my cabin on top of the container, and I talk about that in part 1 of that cabin video. That's a questionable move because all of the support for the container is on the corners, with limited support around the very perimeter. But if you've ever walked on top of a container, you know it's kind of like a shitty metal trampoline. So it's a little bit sketchy building anywhere but right on the corners or the edges of the container. But I had my reasons here, and I'm still getting what I call adjacent strength from being close to the edges, or at least the perimeter of the container. And to walk on this deck, you wouldn't have any idea. It doesn't feel any different than if it was bolted to concrete. So I built a 2x6 frame around the container and out in front with carriage bolts, and a little bit elevated on top of the container just for space for water to pass through. One other note, welding on the roof of a built shipping container is a terrible idea. The weld heats the inside, and the inside, when hot, will catch the insulation or siding or whatever on fire. So that's great. You can see I'm welding, I'm running inside to check, smoke's billowing out the door. That's all absolutely wonderful. The reason for this is I built this container at an off-grid site where I used the generator for power, and I didn't think my generator would run a welder big enough to weld on the container. Turns out I was wrong, because I've since used my little Harbor Freight welder that can run off that generator to weld up on top of containers. And so I could have done this before building out my container. There are 4 billion seconds of deck building content uploaded to YouTube every nanosecond, so I'll spare you the building of the framing of the deck, which is just 2x6s spaced every 16 inches with little supports in between. And of course I've got my Simpson strong tie deck hangers in there for extra support. With the frame done, it was time for the deck boards, also treated 2x6s. The convenient thing about building on top of a container is that it's either 20 feet or 40 feet by 8 feet, and they make boards in sizes that either are or add up to those numbers. So I didn't really have to do any cutting. These are 8-foot boards spanning the width of the container, and I've got 12-foot boards and 8-foot boards up across the front, equaling 20 feet for this 20-foot container. I picked the pattern of the deck boards to generally match the deck below. I then put the project on hold for a while and built a staircase up to the deck and a cabin on top. At that point I hadn't thought much about the deck railing, but I ended up selling a property and salvaging an old metal fence that I thought would look pretty good up there. The horizontal bars on this fence are the ubiquitous Texas oil field sucker rods, so often repurposed on rural Texas fences. Here's an old video explaining the sucker rod.
A rod pump is a relatively simple device and can be operated over long periods of time with minimum cost and maintenance. Individual sucker rods connected by rod couplings make up the rod string. Each rod in the string is coupled to the rod above it and supports the weight of all the rods below it. Polished rods range in diameter from 1 to 1.5 inches and from 8 to 22 feet in length.
Here's what the Texas author John Graves had to say in his essay on Texas fences. Speaking of different fence styles, Graves said, "Perhaps we omit consideration of flights of fancy like the fence someone had built a few years ago in my neighborhood out of upright pipes with oil well sucker rods welded across them. That one held up well, except where drunks had veered off the road and whacked it with their cars, and was handsome enough if you had a taste for aluminum painted sucker rods." It turns out that I do have such a taste, and this railing with its sucker rods and its steel cable. Maybe my favorite part of the whole build out here. To finish out the railing, I took some flat metal plates and drilled holes in them, and then welded 2x2 square tubing to make the vertical uprights of the railing. Over the years, a lot of steel cable has washed up over here. I assume it was at one point used to hold docks to concrete blocks. This wire is super stiff. It's got a buildup of salt and has taken a lot of sun. It took me quite a while to figure out how to work with it. The guy at the local hardware store said out on the oil field they use hammers to smash the clips down onto the wire, but I found that had a tendency to destroy the clips. What worked best for me was just taking a pair of channel locks and squeezing right below the clip as I inched it on down. Coming back and adding a second clip at the end of the loop seemed to help as well. This piece is called the thimble, and it goes inside the loop. This clip holds the cable tight over here. You wouldn't do this if the cable was under any tension, but this is just for decorative purposes. This piece here is called the turnbuckle, and it's used to stretch the cable tight. In the back, the railing connects with the staircase, and there's an open space to access the stairs. The last thing I did was I hung a 2x8 on the front of the deck so that I would have a couple inches of slope from the container to the front of the deck, and then I added these corrugated roofing panels to try to drain water and kick it out the front and give me a little bit of extra shade. I wanted to try to keep water off the shipping container doors and windows since the guy who installed those was an absolute amateur. I cut myself a nice little viewing window through the mesquites out front. And found some of those cool metal chairs in a scrap heap nearby. Slapped a new coat of paint on them. As we take a look at the deck, let me know if you have any questions. Definitely help you as much as I can. Let me know where I can see your container projects. I've had a lot of people reach out and tell me they're working on different projects, and I'd love to see them.